Chris Washington, a young black photographer, prepares for a weekend trip with his white girlfriend, Rose Armitage, to meet her wealthy parents at their secluded estate. Though he's nervous about how they will react to their interracial relationship, Rose assures him they are progressive and accepting. As they drive into the countryside, they hit a deer. The animal's dying gaze unsettles Chris, but it's an incident that foreshadows darker events ahead. A police officer arrives asking for Chris's ID even though he wasn't driving. Rose defends him, challenging the officer's racial bias. Though the officer lets them go, Chris is left uneasy. Arriving at the Armitage estate, Chris meets Rose's parents, Dean and Missy. Dean, a neurosurgeon, overcompensates with his friendliness, making awkward comments about Obama and how he would have voted for him a third time. Missy, a psychiatrist, offers to help Chris quit smoking through hypnosis, a suggestion that makes him uncomfortable. Their brother Jeremy later arrives, showing aggressive behavior and a fascination with Chris's physique, hinting at an obsession with physical superiority. That night, unable to sleep, Chris steps outside for a smoke. He sees Walter, the family's black groundskeeper, sprinting eerily in the dark while Georgina, the housekeeper, stares at her own reflection. Before he can process what he's seeing, Missy invites him inside and unexpectedly hypnotizes him. She takes him to the sunken place, a terrifying void where he loses control of his body, falling into paralyzing darkness while his consciousness remains trapped. When he wakes up, he assumes it was a dream until he realizes he no longer feels the urge to smoke. The next day, the Armitages host a gathering, and Chris meets several wealthy white guests, all of whom display an unnatural fascination with him. They comment on his physique, his blackness, and his talents, making him feel more like an object than a person. One guest, a blind art dealer named Jim Hudson, shows genuine interest in his photography skills. Meanwhile, Chris attempts to connect with another black guest, Logan, who behaves stiffly and unnaturally, almost like a puppet. When Chris discreetly snaps a photo of him, the flash triggers an unsettling reaction. Logan's nose starts bleeding, and he suddenly rushes at Chris, shouting, "Get out!" before being restrained by the others. Disturbed, Chris calls his best friend Rod, a TSA agent, and tells him about the strange behavior at the estate. Rod immediately suspects something sinister. As Chris tries to leave, Rose convinces him to stay. Later, Dean explains that Logan had a seizure, but Chris remains unconvinced. Determined to leave, Chris finds his phone mysteriously unplugged, preventing him from contacting Rod. That night, he decides to leave with Rose, but before he can, he discovers disturbing evidence: photographs of Rose with several black men, including Logan and Georgina, despite claiming Chris was her first black boyfriend. Realizing he's been lured into a trap, he demands to leave. As he attempts to escape, Rose's demeanor shifts from caring to cold. Missy blocks the exit, stirring her teacup, a trigger that hypnotizes Chris again, paralyzing him. He collapses, sinking once more into the sunken place. Chris wakes up tied to a chair in a dark room where a TV plays a pre-recorded video of Rose's grandfather, Roman Armitage, explaining their twisted procedure. The Armitages have developed a process called coagula, which allows them to transplant the consciousness of wealthy white individuals into black bodies, leaving the original host trapped in the sunken place. Chris's body is set to be auctioned off to Jim Hudson, who wants his eyes and photographic talent. In a desperate bid to escape, Chris uses cotton stuffing from the chair to plug his ears, blocking out Missy's hypnotic trigger. When Jeremy comes to retrieve him, Chris brutally attacks him, then fights his way through the house, killing Dean and Missy. As he tries to flee, Georgina runs in front of his car. Feeling guilt over his mother's death in a past accident, he stops and takes her with him, only to realize she's actually possessed by the consciousness of Rose's grandmother. She attacks him, forcing him to crash. Rose and Jeremy attempt to stop Chris, but he overpowers them. Just as Rose reaches for a rifle to kill him, Rod arrives in a TSA car. Chris hesitates, but ultimately leaves Rose to bleed out on the road. As he escapes with Rod, the nightmare finally ends.